Lawrence's. I had no intention of writing a book, especially about my family tree, since I know so very little of it. This all began in the year 2004 while I was uh, at the pleasure of being a resident at the request of the state of Missouri, and I was impressed to write. So I wrote these brief memoirs about the Lawrences' peculiarities and instances in our lives. But since then, this is the year 2013, much has happened. My mom has died, my sister has died, I've gotten married, I have children. So many things have occurred, and it's all been by the grace of God. So these memoirs that you're about to hear took place over a long period of time. From the day that I was born, grew up with my sisters living in poverty projects in St. Louis, Missouri. Where would I go? To watching children come, grow, die, live, marry, experience heartache, sorrow, pain, joy, and by the grace of God, looking forward to the soon turning of Jesus. So, take pleasure in listening to these stories, and you're going to laugh at some. Some will make you cry. But I just want you to know, these are the brief memoirs of a few of the fantastic adventures that Keith has had as a Lawrence. Betty? Who? I really don't know much about Betty. I was told she was my sister. My earliest remembrances of her are from a photo when she was a young girl. Large, bright eyes, big pumpkin grin spread across a chocolate pear-shaped face. She had the whitest teeth and neatly twined braids, which I thought looked more like ant antennas than hair atop her head. As a child, this was the only Betty that I knew, a picture Betty. Not much I knew about her, especially not knowing why she didn't live with us, Mary, Mama, and myself, and never being told much about her. The day I met her was strangely awkward. I believe it was the late 1960s in the projects. The occasion was Betty's birthday. What I did know was that she was in the foster home, whatever that was, and today she was to visit us. Why does a sister have to visit? I never found out why. I do remember some white lady brought her to our apartment, and Mama had these small glass bowls shaped like flowers in which she would put fruited jello filled, with the fruit cocktail inside the jello. I'm not sure if we had cake or ice cream. It all seemed so strange to me. When she arrived, she was all smiles and cordial politeness. This was a young flesh and blood Betty, different from the flat paper Betty in the photograph. This gathering seemed like a hazy dream, since I can't even recall having a birthday party for anyone, let alone this new sister from afar. I remember looking at her as she ate and interacted with Mary and Mama. One sister I was familiar with, but having two? Is that legal for one little brother to be sandwiched between two girls, both older and bigger than he? I mean, who was her father? When and where was she born? Did she want to come and live with us? I'm not sure if she did or didn't. I don't think I would have minded. She had a nice feel about her. I mean, her eyes. They portrayed a longing expectation and weary sadness that I couldn't quite understand. As a child, being shy around people, I never ventured to ask her anything about her or our family. After she left with the woman who brought her, I was no more or less wiser as to who Betty was. Later in life, Mary would tell me that on numerous occasions, Mama was given the opportunity to take Betty back, but declined. Why? I still don't know to this day. Years have passed. Children have been born. Lawrences have lived and died. Yet, Betty the woman now has a family, young and old. But alas, I still don't know this sister of mine like I want to. What is she like? What happened with this family? I still don't have a clue. Father? What's that? Who's he? I was told his name was James or Jim. I never met him. Wouldn't recognize him if I could, even describe anything about him. My father? What's that? Who's he? It seems as if from the moment of my conception I was destined that mine would be a life of deliberate unanswered questions. As a young boy, I didn't even understand the concept of a father. It had always been just Mama, as far as I can remember, until I reached early adolescence. Then it was the sudden appearance of some stranger named George, who would eventually father my younger sister Lamatra. Who was he? I don't know. One day he's just there, in Mama's room. Door closed. Next thing I know, along comes Lamatra. Of course, he was long gone by then. I recall that he was a cartoonist because he brought over some of his artwork once. Not pictures of animals and stuff, but half-naked ladies and black and white sketches. My older sister Mary didn't like him. She would steal money from his wallet while he and Mama had relations at night. Now that's another story. What I distinctly remember about him was that he took me once to work with him in the suburbs at some white lady's house. I worked all day with him, digging, planting, moving shrubs and flowers. I remember looking at the rolling acres of green grass, tall trees and various birds, squirrels, and other indigenous wildlife under a vast blue sky. No high-rise projects marred the horizon. Coming from the inner city projects, this simple exposure to suburban life was an adventure. This white lady had even made lunch for us. She made the biggest, juiciest hamburgers I ever saw, complete with fresh lettuce and tomatoes. I was almost too embarrassed to pick it up, since the usual hamburgers I was accustomed to were hand patties fried in a skillet. I don't remember him sharing any money with me, seeing that I wasn't his son or anything, and this trip and free kid labor didn't make him my father. Father? What's that? Who's he? No matter how many times I asked, no one would tell me who or where my father was. I almost began to believe that poor black people didn't have these things called fathers. TV sitcom families had them. People in books and white people's kids had them. The hell if I know what was up with mine. It didn't even bother me so much until I began school. When asked by my teachers or other kids, I was told by Mama to say, his name was Jim Lawrence and he was deceased. I repeated that so many times that I became callous to even wanting to hear about anybody's daddy. Father? What's that? Who's he? No matter how much time passed and the code of silence about my heritage was muted, deep inside I still wanted to know about this mysterious individual. In my manhood, I attempted to go out and find out about him and did get some information which was quite fascinating, although I was unable to follow up on it. Now that my own hair is peppered with splashes of gray, it doesn't bother me nearly as much as when I was young. Do I still have questions? Yes. Am I like my father? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, what was he like, my father? Father? What's that? Who's he? God knows who, where, when, and why. I promised myself that my own kids would know who their father was and where he and they came from. Though decades of separation, obstacles, divorce, and traumatic circumstances have sought to sever my determination from my children to know their heritage, all along our Heavenly Father knew me from the beginning, even when I didn't know him. Yet I've become intimately acquainted with him and have learned that he always has loved me and guided me. I write these memoirs and stories so that you and my children won't ever have to say, Father, what's that? Who's he? Paper dolls and infantry. Living below the poverty line as African Americans in the late 1960s, or in any era, had the inevitable result of making do with what you got. One could while away the time mulling over what you don't have and hoping things will change for the better in the by and by. Or, as many inner city project families with children did, you became frugal, thrifty, and penny pinching dollar stretchers. I tend to lean toward the true maxim: necessity is the mother of creativity. Or, putting it more mildly, when you ain't got what you want, use what you have to fill in for what you need. By adhering to this principle, black people have survived, endured, and exceedingly prospered under the most extreme circumstances. Thus it was with myself and my sister Mary. As children of a single parent household, we didn't always have the luxury of new toys or even a television set. I can remember many holidays and occasions being given second-hand, third-hand, and hand-me-downs when it came to clothing, furniture, and toys. The local charities and government assistance programs were all part of your youthful history. Though our clothes weren't always fashion correct, they were clean. When it came to amusement, my sister and I were quite creative. Mary, as most young girls, liked dolls. The popular ones at the time were Barbie and Ken, but that required money to purchase them and all their accessories, and money was a rare and precious commodity with Mama. So, being short of coinage, we were long on paper, as in an abundance of J.C. Penney and Sears catalogs, which provided a multiplicitous variety of fad fashions, furniture, and frills for one industrious young black girl to make: paper dolls. Being that we had all these catalogs, some borrowed, some found, of which Mama never ordered anything, we just look at the pictures and imagine that we had the money to buy anything we wanted. Mary, of course, looked at the girl stuff, clothes, baby stuff, etc. I, on the other hand, looked at the boy stuff: toys, games, bikes, the important stuff. Mary would cut out the women, girls, babies, and people in the catalogs and make her own paper dolls, complete with wardrobe and accessories that fit. I have to admit, I was amazed at what she could do with a pair of scissors. She even gave names to her paper family and would go shopping through the different catalogs to clothe these flat folks. I can even recall the conversation she had as she talked to, with, and for these Barbie wannabes. Now, that was just plain weird and kind of creepy to me. When we got into it or had a bad argument, I'd hide her paper dolls or crumble and tear them up. Mary would be furious at me for destroying her delicate creations, and Mama, failing to intercede or yelling at Mary for cutting up catalogs, this didn't help the situation at all. But Mary would grab her scissors and begin to make more paper dolls, which was a good thing for me, to have her cutting paper instead of cutting me. Now, as to myself, the innocent little boy, okay, I wasn't so innocent. Army men were my favorite toys. Since we couldn't afford the then famous G.I. Joe action figures, I was fortunate to have been given a bag of green army men. Little green plastic infantrymen in various poses with thin flat platforms on their feet so they could stand. Some had bazookas and machine guns. Others lay down in crawling sniper positions. I would spend hours playing with my army men, engaging in numerous military campaigns and sometimes winning, sometimes losing. My mighty infantry were courageous and fearless against any foe or anything, whether insect, Martians, or monster. Anything. Except Mary's paper dolls. Let's not go there. My many mock battles were complete with sound effects and music that I made myself. Things like attack, charge, look out, boom, retreat. Army stuff. Nothing dumb and creepy like talking to paper dolls. But then again, let's not go there. The both of us spent countless hours engrossed in our imaginary escape from the hardships of being poor little project kids. Then again, we weren't really poor in the sense of lacking what was really important. True, no bright fancy toys or expensive plastic and metal baubles to impress the other kids in school and in the neighborhood. Nor do we have to hang our heads and lower our eyes and mutter that we didn't have many things to boast and brag about. Because when after all the kids' toys have been broken and interest in them have been lost, it never seems to fail that the empty box, cardboard carton, shiny paper and ribbon is more valuable and fun to play with. So it's not what's inside the box or bag that brings the lasting enjoyment or memories. It's what's inside the kids and how they relate with each other. That's important. We weren't poor. Mary had her paper dolls, I had my infantry, and we had each other. James and Anthony. Ken? These two are my brothers, according to the family tree. But I have no filial affection towards or about them, simply because I know so little about them. And that which I do know of, one, James, isn't the most appealing of memories. What comes to mind is from a child's scar of being beaten mercilessly, of him being hated by my sister Mary, having regrettably to stay at his house while Mama was hospitalized after having a stroke, and his wife's disdain of us. As I grew through my teen years, I recall him only coming around only on Christmas and Thanksgiving to see Mama. Once he helped me tune up my car by putting in new spark plugs and changing the distributor. It still didn't run afterwards. But there was no actual attachment or bond between us. What can I say about Anthony? Very little. I didn't know he existed until one day he just showed up from some distant land, like Boston or somewhere. Age-wise, they were both older. Care and concern-wise, they were both deficient. Mama would always doting on showing Mary and I James' picture when he was in the Navy. I recall the same picture still. He, grinning from ear to ear, poised in his white naval uniform complete with sailor's cap. He looked like a Sambonian monkey in the pillowcase. She always harping on him being the first black manager of a major food grocery store. She even had his picture in the local newspaper. And this person, Anthony? I don't know what he did for a living or where he lived. These two are brothers. My brothers, as I'm told. Relatives. James and Anthony. Kin? My kin? So says the family tree. I'm not familiar with many of his branches, and I know that the roots run deep. Yet I think there are some nuts among the leaves that even the squirrels are reluctant to gather and curiously wonder about. Lemaitre's lesson. Little sisters can be both an annoying nuisance and a terrific sidekick. Of course, having Lemaitre for a younger sibling is an understatement. I think it's written somewhere in the official Big Brother's manual, Section 1, Paragraph 2, that the number of interruptions, tattletaling, mocking, and downright irritable shenanigans must not exceed the tolerable limitations as calculated by the age of the bothersome sister, multiplied by the height and weight, divided by the distance chased by the older brother before the mama yells at him to leave the guilty little sister alone. Unquote. Lemaitre wasn't just your typical precocious little girl always under her brother's arm. Though for the most part I've changed many of her diapers, not Pampers, mind you. Oh no, nothing like that. I mean the cloth kind, complete with yellow-headed plastic safety pins shaped like ducks. Mama insisted that I learn to change, wash, powder, and pamper her. As Lemaitre grew from bouncing baby and tumbling toddler to adolescent terror, her attachment and obnoxious exploits waned from being my emulator to Mama's pet. As in, when she couldn't get her absolute way with me, she'd instantaneously become a midget informant to Mama about anything that I did or excluded her from. I recall the time when she would rip and run throughout the apartment, oblivious to Mama's threatening warnings, all which fell upon deaf ears, much to her own humorous fall, or more accurately, to her own yanking. You see, Mama was sitting on the couch with walking cane in hand, while the macho would zip by repeatedly. Well, on one of her ill-fated dashes, Mama timed her passing and quickly extended her cane, crooked outward, and hooked Lamatra around the neck, yanking her with enough force that her own inertia caused her feet to bolt upward, thus ending her circuitous lapse and career as some imaginary race car driver. This yanking came complete with a spanking from Mama, which was anything but just a spanking. Elaboration on the many antics of my little sister initiated could prove to be quite voluminous. But, like the time she set the trash can on fire in the house, her defiant proclamation to me that little girls don't stink, as she watched me preening myself in preparation to going out on a date, and commenting to her about the need to bathe and practice good hygiene, to the time she complained to Mama that I wouldn't let her use my tape recorder, forcing me to let her say something on the tape, which she thus began to belt out her version of Stinky Bloomer's funky draws, much to my slight amusement. In those days, the one place I often retired to was my room, which in the 70s was bedecked with the latest art and movie posters, hanging ceiling nets, blacklight painted walls, and stereo. You know, the typical older brother paraphernalia which was off limits to little sisters. I mean, it's all in the official manual, you know. The macho would sit in the doorway listening to whatever I was playing or just chatting away whether I was listening or not. To enter my room uninvited was forbidden on pain of immediate retribution from me. She'd watch intensely as I put my money away from my job at Burger Chef into my specially compartmentalized wooden brown box that I required a knowledge of the hidden combination to open, or so I thought, where I was saving my earnings to buy my movie camera equipment. I was quite industrious in those days, working hard to purchase what I needed. My life evolved around my fascination with cinematography and martial arts. I'd often write, direct, and produce several short films ranging from comedy, animation, satirical news documentaries, and even produce a music video using Super 8mm and regular 8mm sound film. The mantra would assist me serving as prop girl, off-camera audience, sound effects crew, etc., etc. She once functioned as an impromptu fire department, extinguishing a fire set on the stage during filming one day by beating it out with a shoe. I rewarded her by filming her performing magic, imitating me doing kung fu, and running across the field. Little sister had moved up a notch with older brother now. Unfortunately, my time living at home was drawing to an abrupt end. The late 70s were wonderfully tumultuous and definitely interesting. As someone has stated, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. My relationship with Mama was strained and hurtling toward an impasse. The incident which served to expedite my exodus from home escalated from a dastardly speed perpetuated by the now young adolescent Lamatra when, upon instigation from Mama, broke into my cash box, stealing my hard-earned wages that I was saving. I mean, all she had to do was ask me, and I would have given her what she needed. But no! By an unauthorized entry into my room, violating my privacy, stealing from me, and betraying my trust. Remember, Lamatra would watch as I deposited my wages into my box and concealed its whereabouts. This was an unforgivable act that demanded avenging. Thus began Lamatra's lesson. After being furiously angry, I began to plan my attack. Yelling wouldn't suffice. Chasing her around the apartment, though temporarily satisfying, that just wasn't it either. But older brother privacy. The method and plan did manifest itself. The plan? Teach little sister never to violate older brother's privacy. The method? Scare the braids off her nappy little head. The how? Borrow tactics from the Alfred Hitchcock horror thriller movie Psycho. In the movie Psycho, the killer, Anthony Perkins, dresses up in his mother's dress and kills people with a large butcher knife. This popular fright flick had been seen by millions of people, including my little sister. And fortunately, the movie had just aired on TV recently, and so it was planned. The bathroom was down the hall from my room, which provided the perfect hiding place to spring from. So, I donned one of Mama's old dresses and put one of her old gray wigs on my head and cut out a very large cardboard knife to complete the creepy transformation. In the film, the unsuspecting victim climbs the stairs and walks down the hall when suddenly this dress-wearing, knife-wielding psycho jumps out and slashes mercilessly at the petrified victim. I waited a few days until the matcha thought I had forgotten about what she had did, and she again felt comfortable enough to sit but not enter my room. So I hid in the bathroom while she was in the living room and called out to her to come get something for me. Innocently, the matcha skipped towards my room, expecting to step inside, but just as her foot touched the threshold, I sprang out from the bathroom with a blood-curdling yell, holding high the cardboard knife, mimicking the film's infamous horror scene. LaMancha turned to see what she assumed to be the real, crazy dress-wearing killer and was so terrified that she let out a yell, "Mama!" as she half stumbled, half ran back down the hall towards the living room, eyes bulging, heart pounding with her hair standing on end. I burst out laughing as little sister peeped around the corner, staring wide-eyed at me. Mama, of course, didn't care as long as I put back her dress and wig. Payback was quite pleasurable. I didn't mean to cause her any permanent psychological trauma, just to scare her. Really scare her. And I did. The decades have passed since that particular episode in our lives. LaMancha went on to attend my old high school, even participated in the yearly Vashon High's Request the Pleasure talent show. I, of course, filmed the show, capturing LaMancha singing the Whitney Houston song, The Greatest Love of All. Little sister had her share of trauma and physical obstacles to overcome in life, such as having rickets, wearing leg braces, and scoliosis, undergoing various surgeries at a young age, and later being diagnosed with lupus. I recall meeting her fiancé, Marty Johnson, once over at Mary's house in the early 1990s. I think he was a little bit frightened of me. Maybe something LaMancha might have told him about me, you think? Little sister will go on to marry and have children of her own. She seems to be happy raising her two sons, caring for her family, singing in the church choir, and living life. And Mama, now aged, yet still as boisterous as ever, resides in a nursing care facility with faithful little sister looking after her. Ironically, LaMancha's name is a combination of French and Latin words meaning mother. Little sisters can be a pain in the butt. Little sisters can be obnoxious. Little sisters can be one of God's methods of tempering older brothers and His way of teaching families about the value of caring and loving one another. Little sisters can be precious, which is what they're supposed to be. And that's what LaMancha was and is to me. And about LaMancha's lesson, I've forgiven her a long time ago. Perhaps she's teaching her own children some valuable lessons about family, about life. Would I do the same thing again to my little sister if she went into my room? I mean, would I scare her like that again? Of course I would. That's what older brothers do to little sisters. Hey, it's in the official manual, you know. Lisa. My sister Elaine's daughter Lisa was special. I didn't know many of my own relatives were the first, second, or third generation for some unknown reason, which to this day I still don't understand. But Lisa, I grew to love. Though our time was brief, this niece, my niece, was a bright star whose fleeting entrance into my life would impart an indelible, bittersweet memory on my heart. Lisa Marie Parker honored this earth for 30 years, of which many lives were influenced. My earliest memories of Lisa are when she'd visit Mary and I in our fifth floor project apartment. She never seemed to mind that we were the poor inner city relatives who lived a simple but fascinating life. She wanted to know, meet, and intimately relate with her aunts, uncles, and grandmother. While Mama's welcoming and grandmotherly etiquette wasn't always cordial or warm towards her, okay, Mama could be downright ornery and obnoxious, she did take a strange interest in Lisa, if not because she was her granddaughter, but because it provided something to criticize and berate. Lisa especially liked Mary and I, and was delighted to listen to her talk, and Lisa could talk. She wasn't shy about speaking her mind or biting her tongue on any subject, a trait which I would later encounter in my younger sister Lamatra. Come to think of it, outspoken courage in tongue and attitude seems to be a dominant trait in many of the Lawrence women, which is a good thing to possess. Sometimes. Lisa was tall, with dark black hair and light mocha skin, bright brown eyes gleaming with energy and fascination. Her smile exuded an attractive glow that hinted of a mischievous humor and sarcastic wit that both irritated and drew you to her. As time passes, people tend to change with growth and experiences of living. Lisa was Lisa. A bit rebellious? Maybe. But the transition from adolescent teenager to young adult isn't always smooth, especially in our estranged family. Lisa's immediate family consisted of her mom, Elaine, stepfather, Frank Cousin, and his children, Stevie, Frank Jr., called Frappy, Rita, and Eric. And on Elaine's side from their marriage, there was her younger siblings, Randy, Lynn, and little Victor, named after my older brother. These by name were all cousins. Lisa was a Parker, as defiantly different and proud as her father. They moved from the Pine Lawn, North County area to the more affluent suburb city of Ferguson, Missouri. The benefits of the family's exterminating business had its rewards. They had cars, pool, etc. Although prosperity doesn't always guarantee happiness. That's another story. I would often visit them on weekends, much to the enjoyment of Lisa and the other kids. We'd often take hikes through the January Wabash Park near their home, spending hours just talking. At Lisa's insistence, I demonstrate my martial arts skills and exercises, of which Lisa referred to the fluid, graceful movements with quip, "You can dance!" Graduations, holidays, weddings, joy, laughter, tragedy, and sorrow. We experienced it all. Attachments are hard to break. Heart bonds are nearly impossible to sever when they are linked to blood-borne experiences shared within families who actually know each other as we few did. Mary, Lamatra, Lisa, and myself. Stevie would go on to become a prestigious corporate lawyer. Rita exhibited all the pimp and pomp of an airline stewardess, which she was. Little Lynn, beautiful, prissy, and of articulate speech, would later grace the television airways as a bright, sandy-haired St. Louis news reporter before moving to New York and marrying some fortunate young man. Randy, rambunctious and quite the ladies' man, he looked up to me as some wise African Chinese monk. Married and moved to Maryland. Frank Jr. would drift into some uncertain destiny of which I'm not sure of. Young Victor would be preening for college and beyond. Sadly, Eric would slip from this life after having suffered from schizophrenia, as I'm told, followed shortly after by his father, Frank Sr. Lisa knew sorrow and loss in her life, yet Lisa was still Lisa. I hated funerals. For ironically, the only times I got to see the Lawrence family with all its extensions was only during funerals and weddings. People introducing themselves to each other, still strangers to me, and then vanishing back to wherever they came from. I still hate that. Unbeknownst to me, Lisa had been diagnosed with systemic lupus erythematosus and would finally succumb all too soon. Yet even as this malady ravaged her body and sought to quench her spirit, she fought defiantly with all the fiery determination and unyielding grit humanly possible. From visiting her in the hospital to the trips to comfort and laugh with her in the assisted living nursing facility as her body eventually gave way. Lisa's bright personality and wit never broke. I don't believe that she was afraid to die. I believe that she was just as sure and determined that she would be in heaven with Eric. At her funeral, eulogies were presented. Lynn recited a poem. Tears flowed, and a multitude of grieving friends and estranged family members wept, consoled, and offered their sympathy. The mourners sat down at the end of the chapel aisle. They sat near a closed casket with a large framed picture of Lisa surrounded by flowers and banners, gently resting on top. My tears were no less deep, my heart no less broken, as if I had lost my own child, feeling the emptiness and loss that death brings. I sat near the front, after having touched my bereaved sister Lane as she was led out at the end of the service. I gazed at the picture of Lisa again and smiled, for I saw more than just a sleeping dear one, resting safe out of pain and harm's way. I saw Lisa's bright, contagious smile, her head slightly tilted to the side, eyes twinkling with mischief, a strand of hair dangling across her cheek. I could almost hear her say to me, "Pee-wee," she rarely called me Uncle Keith, "don't cry for me. I'm okay. I don't hurt anymore. You can dance." As the long procession of cars exited the parking lot en route to the burial site, I could imagine Lisa commenting about all this parade of vehicles in her honor. Wow. She ever being the center of attention, even in her attire and immaculate detail in which she kept her own car clean. She probably gives some directions and advice to this caravan of mourners. I smiled again at the thought. That would be just like her. I miss you, this endeared one, Lisa Marie Parker, my niece. Mashed potatoes ain't just for eating. Mary Lee and Pee Wee sitting at the table, picking at Mama's food. Should be eating, should be chewing, but this food ain't good. Not that Mama can't cook, not that Mama can't bake, but we just can't swallow this. Oh no, for goodness sake. So we fake that we're done and want to have fun and ask if we can do it. To clear away the table, mashed potatoes and all, 'cause we sure as heck can't chew it. She noddingly agrees to our helpful request, and for that we are most surely blessed. As giggles escape, our hearts swell with glee for artist Pee Wee and sculptor Mary Lee. The dinner table was metal, shiny, square, and white, perfect for drawing and sculpting all night. Pee Wee would draw with his pencils and pen, airplanes and monsters and funny stick men. Make a mistake, no problem, no sweat. Just grab a towel, make sure it's wet. Wipe it off and draw it again. Doodling fun, not paper, but on tin. Mary Lee would sculpt animals and people, tall, big, and fat, but not out of clay. Oh no, nothing like that. What we used to mold, shape, and label as art was manufactured in the kitchen by Mama's pots and quartz. The texture is quite different. That's the truth. I ain't lying. It can be boiled, baked, or whipped, even greased up for frying. For making things to play with, it just can't be beaten, 'cause mashed potatoes ain't just for eating. Many years have passed since Mary and I were small. Would you believe she has a daughter, grandchildren, and all? I too have young ones out there also, exploring the world today. My face is now weathered, no wrinkles though. Beard and mustache gray. Should you ask me to recite the antics in our day, prepare yourself to grin and laugh, and that's perfectly okay. I'd refer you to the days gone by and relive the times with a sigh, breathing out the atmosphere of yore and yesteryear. So lend your ear to me, my friend, and this is what you'll hear. Computer games and videos aren't things that you'll be meeting, but adventurous Moffats, these Lawrence kids, are who you will be greeting. No hooting and hollering or raising up sand, for that would be defeating. Oh no, they'll be playing on the tabletop with mama's food that's leaking. No rainy day nor thundercloud could cause their fun to weaken, while molding, shaping, and rolling this stuff causes one to sweeten. It's time for you to understand that mashed potatoes ain't just for eating. Mama's parakeets. I can't say that Mama was a lover of pets such as dogs and cats, for when I was young, I can't even remember having a fishbowl. If it had fur, hair, paws, or claws, we didn't have one. Now feathers, that was something else. Mama did love birds, especially canaries and parakeets. To let my sister Mary tell it, she'd say Mama cared more about her parakeets than about us. Mama made sure they were fed and had fresh water every day, even covering their estate at night to give them their privacy when they slept. I called it an estate because, unlike most bird cages, this one was a towering brass structure with several levels, which reminded me of a wiry condominium. On various nefarious occasions, after having been chastised for some mischievous deed, I'd take my revenge and retaliation out on Mama's precious parakeets. Nothing life-threatening or exclusively cruel, I mind you. Just a little poking, squirting water, and banging on their cage. Their terrified chirping and skirting from perch to perch never seemed to be quite as satisfying as I imagined. I feel bad about it later, much later, after I'd done it several more times. After all, her parakeets hadn't done anything to me personally. They were just there. In addition to the pair of blue-green speckled-headed chirpers residing with us, Mama also had two bright yellow canaries, male and female songsters whom Mama adored. She would go on and on about how cute they were as they huddled together when they slept. My sister and I had to be extra quiet while these two perched lovers snoozed romantically. For amusement and comfort, these pampered fowls were accommodated with swings, a variety of seeds, bells, bowls, bass, and even multiple mirrors for them to preen and pluck themselves. I also had the privilege of cleaning the cage after these feathered celebrities. As a kid, I thought, it seemed to me, no matter how much junk you put inside this bird cage to assimilate their natural environment, they still weren't free to fly outside when and where they wanted. So I reasoned that they resented this loss and expressed it by depositing their droppings throughout their bedecked abode. Of course, that meant I had to open the cage door, which caused them to flit to the penthouse or the upper levels of the bird cage. Sometimes, on rare occasions, Mama would purposely let them fly out of their cage and explore our apartment. They usually kept to the tops of the window curtains as Mama talked to them. After a brief hiatus of controlled freedom, she'd herd them back inside by waving a scarf or a towel as if she was some sort of airplane flight director signaling incoming aircraft. Sometimes they wouldn't cooperate, and I'd have to gently capture them with my hands and place them back upon their perches, contrary to their chirping. For some reason, I don't think they were thanking me in bird talk, but more so parakeet profanity and canary cussing. I remember one of Mama's parakeets died. He had been plucking out his breast feathers and hadn't eaten for some time. I don't know if it was due to illness, stress, or what. Again, I had the mournful task of disposing of the body. No fancy funeral, just a solemn trip to the trash can. Seemed like a sad end for something that appeared so full of life. Mama kind of took it in stride. But when the others began to die, I think she gave up on keeping birds in the house. The last survivor was a canary. He even looked lonely and depressed in that huge citadel. So one day in mercy, it was decided to let him go free. I opened his cage and gently caught him, cupping him in my hands. As I walked downstairs into the outside, I could feel his little heart rapidly thumping in anticipated excitement, as if he knew what was about to happen. One last time I looked at him, then tossed him up into freedom. Off he flew. I watched until he disappeared out of sight above the high-rise buildings into the bright blue sky. Strange. A little yellow canary leaving the projects. Mama had kept her parakeets for years, but this would be the last time. Most black folks living in the projects in those days weren't particularly interested in the plight of endangered species of any creatures. At that time, we were an endangered species, striving and hoping for freedom from poverty, racism, and disenfranchisement. But on this day, one lonely canary would be freed from captivity, and one little black boy will begin his journey to know sorrow, pain, and joy, all toward his freedom on this adventure called life. One-legged chicken. Staying at Mama Jane's house while Mama was away sometimes could be fun, especially in the area of amusement. The house on Theodosia in St. Louis was rather cozy for just two people, but when grandchildren are added to the equation, exploration of the premises is basic in the official manual on Little Project Kids. Unfortunately, grandparents ain't never heard of no such manual. Thus, certain rooms and furniture were off limits. So Mary and I would amuse ourselves to pass the time using what God had given us, an adaptable humor circumspect to our environment and circumstances. On one such episode of adolescent humor occurred upon one seemingly mundane day when Mama Jane and Papa Charlie were home. The usual schedule of activities were proceeding as usual. Mama Jane would be preparing dinner. Papa Charlie would be seated in his chair watching westerns like Bonanza or Gunsmoke, pausing frequently to take a swig from his nearby stashed pint of whiskey, talking to the TV and himself. Mary and I would be sitting in chairs opposite each other waiting for something else to come on, like The Wonderful World of Disney or something for kids. We were bored, extremely bored. So to amuse ourselves, we began pantomiming and making animals with our hands, a kind of figure charades game, trying to guess the answer. We were giggling and snickering at each other's antics, which I think was beginning to annoy Papa Charlie. Not heeding the warnings from Mama Jane and the obvious glances we were getting, Mary formed a fist with the thumb protruding down, looked at me and said, "Hey Keith, know what this is?" Inquisitively shaking my head, I said, "No, what is it?" Then she placed the thumb protruding fist on the arm of the chair and began hopping this strange-looking creature up and down and replied, "It's a one-legged chicken." I immediately burst out laughing, which drew the rapid response from Papa Charlie to be quiet and Mama Jane's definite displeasure. Obviously, this was Mary's fault, though it was hilariously funny to me and innocent in motive. I think Papa Charlie thought we were making fun of him, being an amputee. Though we wouldn't even think of doing such a horrid thing, I took the brunt of the blame because I was the one who laughed out loud. After my chastisement, I felt really bad, not because of being falsely accused, but for the pain it caused him, and being afraid to apologize, explain the laughter. I still had visions of a pirate's wrath in my mind. I said nothing, remaining silent even throughout my young adulthood. Yet, with the grandmotherly tenderness and soothing touch that only Mama Jane could render, afterwards she would approach Mary and I and stand before us with hands behind her back, looking at us. The two of us sheepishly embarrassed, thinking maybe we were about to be whipped by her concealed strap. We prepared for the worst. As Mama Jane brought her hands forward, not wielding an instrument of pain, but holding two cherry popsicles, much to our relief, we breathed a sigh of relief and blessed surprise. We thanked her and accepted these tokens of Mama Jane's love. Though she squinted her eye at us, I believe she knew that I didn't mean any harm, and this frozen appeasement was more for my wounded heart. Of course, Mary still thought it was funny and never took responsibility for it. Today, we both still laugh at this misadventure. A note of warning to you younger siblings: take caution joking in mixed company with older sisters, and especially watch out for any one-legged chickens. Papa Charlie. Papa Charlie was an interesting man, at least what I remember of him from my earliest recollections. The concept of having a grandfather was something strange and quite foreign. Even today, admittedly, is something that I can't say that I'm fully versed upon. I mean, the intricate relationship that it entails. Sure, I can expound on the classical and traditional responsibilities and privileges these entities entertain, but as to the closeness of blood ties, I'm at a loss in reference to grandfatherly experience. Perhaps if and when I become one, I may then speak with an authoritative eloquence. This individual, my mother's husband, to me as a child was someone I both feared, respected, and was intrigued by. I never referred to him as grandfather or Mr. Charles, but simply as Papa Charlie. Not from any foreknowledge, but only because my sister Mary, being older than myself, called him thus. Papa Charlie, as I remember, was of medium build, dark skin, with close cropped black hair, a face which bore the signature of time, and a life tempered with struggles, hardships, and aged wisdom. His eyes were a deep brown beneath furrowed brows that had a duality of piercing toughness and serious interrogation when he looked at you, which is why I never made direct eye contact with him, always answering his inquiries with a militaristic "yes sir," "no sir," without hesitation. Yet at times, when he teased and flirted with his wife, Mama Jane, these same dark eyes gleamed with a boyish charm and warmth that only he and Mama Jane knew of. I wasn't afraid of him because of his gruffness or demeanor, but because, as an assumed storybook misconception derived from films, fantasy, and a little boy's sheltered experience with people living with disability. You see, Papa Charlie was an amputee, having only one leg. Actually, it was a below-the-knee amputation. But to a little kid in those days, only pirates were one-legged, with either a hooked hand, eye patch, and a bloody cutlass, sporting a parrot, buckles and belts, cussed, spit, and drank rot gut through crooked teeth, sailing beneath a skull and crossbone flag, possessing a hidden treasure looted from unfortunate ships at sea, forcing the doomed crew to walk the plank and sing in pirate shanties. 16 men on a dead man's chest, yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum. That's why I was somewhat apprehensive. Okay, I was afraid of him and his wooden leg. Though I never actually saw him with a parrot, hooked hand, or knew of any hidden treasures around the house. No, he did work in his garden a lot and talk to his potatoes and plants, according to Mary. Or if he ever even was a sailor in the Navy when he lost his leg. Papa Charlie did like to drink alcohol, chew tobacco, and occasionally would spout a word of profanity now and then. His prosthesis was made of wood. Instead, it was made of a hard flesh-colored material complete with leather straps and matching shoe, which he often would leave in the bathroom, much to the sheer horror of Mary and myself. For when Mama Jane babysit us at their house, it was quite terrifying to have a look at this severed limb standing in the corner, sometimes with the pants still attached to it, near the toilet tissue while trying to pee. And just try to imagine what it was like if you had to do number two. No magazine or comic book could deter your wandering eye from staring at this booted thing facing you as if to say, I'll kick your half-naked butt if you keep looking at me. You quickly look away from it, hoping it wouldn't move. Who knows? Maybe Papa Charlie was a pirate, or used to be one, and this false leg was kept in the bathroom to protect his treasure. You never know. I do know that I didn't want to get stomped by it, so our toilet trips were quick and few. Bowels and bladders were well trained. Having said that, as time and numerous trips to Papa Charlie and Mama Jane's house came and went, he didn't seem so menacing once you got used to him. He had a certain air of dignity about him, which would show each time he would put on his prosthesis, putting the neatly bandaged limb into the top of the hollow leg, adjusting the leather straps around his thigh. I remember his particular gait as he walked, swinging his leg with each step, not clumsily or awkward, but with experienced finesse, simultaneously swaying his arms rhythmically in sync with some silent cadence only he could hear. I didn't know much about Papa Charlie's history of life. Being the youngest and last Lawrence son, my family's roots and origins weren't forwarded to me during this time in life. So, bits and pieces of significant episodes are more prominent than others. One such time services when Papa Charlie took me for a haircut. I remember he and I walking down the street to the barber shop. Not much conversation, just walking, and occasionally listening as he spoke to someone as they passed by, and myself feeling a little like an ant sitting in a huge barber chair as older gray and white-haired men converse about whatever it is that older men talk about in between playing checkers, reading newspapers, and listening to the radio. Occasionally, someone would make a comment about how my hair should be cut. After my shearing, we walked back home, myself feeling a little bit older. I think it had something to do with the barbers applying the aftershave lotion and talc on me. After all, aftershave lotion was for grown-ups only. My day with Papa Charlie wasn't so bad. He even brought me a soda pop. A little something for the road. Come to think of it, I can't recall ever seeing Papa Charlie smile or laugh, unless it was on the inside. Whether he did or did not, I kind of think he did, at least sometime in his life. Unfortunately, I can say that I did see him get angry and maybe even express a little inner pain because of a humor between a certain brother and a certain sister. I know this hurt him, though it was unintentional. I know because I was that brother and Mary was that sister. But that's another story. I wrote this particular story called Two back in 2004, and this is put in I guess this is one of my third book. It's called Prison Sojourn, Memoirs and Reflections, A Journey Continued Toward Home. This is a 3-volume book that I wrote, one of the many books that I authored. This is called Two. It's my 46th year on this planet, and all my hairs have been black, from my crown, mustache, and goatee, and occasional beard. So where and when did these two gray hairs come from? These twin brothers of color. They even have the nerve to sprout on opposite hemispheres of my head. One on the right of my temple, short and bold. The other in my goatee, long and obvious. Am I to recant my creed so often given to my children?
We dads don't get old. We just fluctuate our appearance seasonally with grace. Recant? Never. These two hairs of gray don't change anything, right? Serving with blade and razor hinders little their determination to return and proclaim their presence bold. Futile attempts at baldness wanes as even the nubs mockingly reappear with the returning locks and strands. These two. So I accept them, even admire them, these harbingers of distinguished maturity and wisdom. Sounds good. A certain regal attractiveness just makes them kind of becoming on me, for they herald an experience earned wisdom possessed by the owner of these two. Yeah, me, a bronze chiseled African American black man, adorned with dark ebony manicured mane, streaked with noble rivers of silver gray. Okay, time and age have not been cruel to me, thank God. These two are an awkward, or like an awkward award for endurance, perseverance, and victory during this particular crucible. Yeah, that's it. As I peer into the mirror, comb in hand, elation in tow, these two, that rationale will work. I mean, it'll work just fine for me. Hey, what's that? What's that I see? Oh Lord, it's not two. Now there's three. So I wrote that little story about my hairs popping up and changing from this dark black to gray to silver gray. But I know somebody once said that just by my voice, she thought I was tall, over 6 feet, dark. She didn't say handsome, but I'm gonna add that anyway. Yeah, I'm not over 6 feet. I'm actually 6 feet even. I'm not exactly dark. I'm kind of in between, a chocolate butter pecan, waffle walnut ice cream color. The cone too. Anyway, I wrote that poem back in 2004 called Two. Hope you like it. Okay, so this is for you, Dory. I'm doing this particular one. I'm a storyteller, so I'm going to tell you one of my stories. I wrote for my sister. My sister died a couple years back of lung cancer, and I used to stay with her for a little bit. And one of the things about it is I used to sleep on the couch when I got off work, and I had my shoes off. For some strange reason, she assumed that my feet had an odorous smell that could wake the dead. I tend to doubt that. But I wrote a little poem about it, a little story just for my sister. And I put it in my little book. This is a book here. And it's Infamous Tales, short stories. I wrote 3 books. This is just one of them. And I'm going to read to you that particular one that I wrote just for my sister to refute her claim that men feet smell. I mean, we know better than that, don't we? But anyway, it was entitled, my sister's name was Mary. And it says, Mary, men feet don't stink. I spent a few nights at my sister's house long ago when I was young. On the couch I slept. Off came my shoes, which inspired this tale, and for this cause Mary wept. In the morning she rose and passed by my toes, when picking up the scent that invaded her nose. With gagging breath and frown on her face, she assumed that my feet stunk up the place. I mean, she thought I was asleep, for my eyes did not blink, and she uttered these words, "Man, your feet stink." Alas, how could she accuse me of such? For men feet don't stink. I mean, they don't stink much. Now I must admit this, that my shoes, where they stood, might try to leave like my socks, which would, and they could. But what sense would it make to have socks crusty and hard, running the neighborhood streets and laying in the yard? But back to the question at hand, about my toes and such stinking up the land. You see, I have to say this. I say to you now that you listen up well. Because men's feet don't stink. No, 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 no. Men's feet don't stink. No, no. Men's feet don't smell. To verify this claim so the truth won't be hid, an experiment I performed, an experiment I did. After working hard all day, standing up and such, I proved men's feet don't stink. No, they don't stink much. I took off my shoes, then looked all around. I took off my socks. I laid them on the ground. Well, then I waited. I waited. I waited. Birds stopped flying. Flies started dying. Folks started crying. Even mud started drying. Man, I ain't lying. My eyes began to water, and not because they oughter. Wallpaper began to peel. Babies began to squeal. Lumps began to form in uncooked oatmeal. Clouds started snowing. Wind started blowing. Rivers stopped flowing. People started crowing and then began throwing rocks and bars of soap at me. Dogs started sneezing. Roaches started leaving. And the rats and all the blind cats became bald. So I eventually got the message and finally the hint that some folks' feet give off a terrible scent. But that was long, long ago. Men soak your feet every 6 months and give it all that you got. Twice a year at least, whether you need to or not. To test this theory, I could say, sniff your socks each and every day. After you regain consciousness and gotten up off the floor, hang them things out the window, or better still, toss them out the door. So, my dear Mary, again to you I tell, men's feet don't stink. Men's feet don't smell. No odor will you find that's stale, pungent, or reeks. No foul aroma exists. Of this, O Mary, I speak. So, my dear Mary, I say to you, hark! When a man's feet do smell, them dogs definitely bark. So I wrote the little poem for my sister Mary, and she thought it was very cute. And I miss my sister. But this is just me. I used to like having fun and expressing my thoughts and feelings and emotions. Even when people say weird things like my feet smell, that's just not true. But anyway, that's just one story. I have a couple I'm going to tell you. One is I was getting a little bit older. I said a little bit now. A little bit older. I noticed, if you know, you can see now, I have some hair on my head. It's not because I'm going bald. Don't think that that's happening, because that's not happening. So I noticed one day as I was shaving that I noticed two unusual, uninvited guests. That is a story that I call Two. This next story I wrote when I was a younger man attending college, and actually when I was taking nursing classes that day. And I was working full time, going to school full time, and that was a challenge, especially being a young dad. And my buddy, my son Daniel, his two sisters, they were old enough to attend school, and I would drop them off to school, and then he and I would head over to college. And of course, I prepare him a lunch and give him his books and little video games to play. And he was so excited because he was going to big people's school with his dad. And that was actually midterm time, and I had to take a midterm, and there was no one to keep my son, so I took my son with me. So I wrote a story about it. It's called Midterm Muse. During my college days, I was sometimes faced with the dilemma of finding a babysitter for my kids. Working full time and going to school full time while juggling three kids can be quite the challenge. My daughters, Janae and Jillian, were both attending school, St. Louis Junior Academy, but my son Daniel wasn't old enough yet to attend school. Even though each night we would prepare his lunchbox along with his sisters, as we all clambered into my van, he would accompany them to school each morning and watch as they ran into the school grounds or chattered with their fellow classmates. This way, he felt as if he too was going to school. He often voiced his adamant disapproval of not being old enough to attend. Usually, our babysitter would have him on days when both his mother and I worked or had classes. But on this particular day, somehow the scheduling was erratic and I was forced to take him with me to college, all to his excitement. For now he could boast to his sisters that he went to big people school, where they just went to little kid school. Being that this was midterm exam times, I explained to him about being very quiet in class and taking along the necessary items to keep him occupied. Example, his books, his favorite toys, and my handheld video game. He gleefully looked toward this new adventure. Upon explaining my circumstances to my class instructor, she agreed to permit us to proceed with the exam. For some reason, I think that he, Daniel, charmed her with his fellow classmates, all female nursing students, by the way, which helped me to dispel the pre-exam jitters. After all the compliments on how cute and well-mannered he was, the serious business of brainstorming and tackling essay questions and intricate multiple-choice questions commenced. Daniel climbed onto his desk near me, just like all the other adults did. When the instructor passed out the exams, Daniel took out his papers and began to draw. Take his exams too. As time crept by, Daniel's books, toys, and video game lost their interest, and mid-morning nap time began to draw on. I glanced at him periodically as his head bobbed up and down repeatedly. Though he did try to lay his head down on the desktop, it was a futile attempt. Having fought a good fight, he walked over to me and laid his head on my leg. I gently lifted him onto my lap, adjusted my desk, and proceeded to write my answers. One arm around my son, seated on my lap, his head snuggled against my chest. He slept quietly as the exam continued on. I cradled him with my left hand and managed to turn pages and write with my right hand. A few minutes passed. Most of the other students had left after completing their exams. My instructor walked up to me, paused a moment, and said, "I really admire that," she said. I glanced up at her curiously and wondered what she meant by that. But she walked back to her desk and sat down. I finished my exam, lifted Daniel up onto my shoulder as he shifted his position, embracing my neck with his arms, and drifted back to sleep. I stood up and turned in my test. My instructor smiled at me as she accepted it, placing it on her desk. "Thanks for permitting me to bring my son with me," I said. "You're welcome, Keith. It was no trouble at all. You two take care of yourselves," she said. I said goodbye to her and headed out the door. I was tempted to ask her what she meant by her comment to me earlier, but I decided not to. I figured out later what she meant. She was complimenting me for being a young African-American man, a father, who, in spite of the prevalent delinquency of many black males who shirk parental responsibilities and choose not to even work, further his education and include his child, even in challenging circumstances, without shame or embarrassment. That's what she saw when she looked at me with my son. This further solidifying the bond of love and family, my family. I appreciated her remark. The next problem was that after my son Daniel told his two sisters about his day at college, they would want to come along too. How was I going to pull that off? That was just my midterm exam. I guess when my final exams are due, it's going to be pretty interesting. So that's a story I wrote called Midterm News. It's one of the many stories I've written. I never chose to be a storyteller. This is something that God called me to do. And as someone once said, "You tell stories?" Nah, you mean lies? No, I don't tell lies. I tell life experiences. I tell African American history. I tell biblical tales, moral stories, and principles. I even tell some humorous witticisms and some little moral things that makes you think. That's just one of the many. That's for you, Dory. So let's move along. Hope you enjoyed that story.